For more than 500 million years, before anything with lungs had ever walked across dry land, the ocean was already building predators unlike anything the surface of the Earth would ever produce. The first confirmed apex predator in our planet's history hunted with compound eyes containing around 16,000 individual lenses. It was stalking prey at a time when life on land had not yet advanced beyond simple organisms. The ocean had already learned how to build sophisticated killers long before the continents had anything worth hunting, and it never stopped. One armored fish, living around 375 million years ago, generated a bite force approaching 8,000 pounds per square inch, nearly twice that of a modern saltwater crocodile. It had no teeth at all, only sharpened plates of living bone. It ruled its world for roughly 25 million years before the ocean erased it and built something even more formidable. Across the ages, 5 completely unrelated groups of animals independently rose to become the most dangerous predators on Earth: arthropods, armored fish, marine reptiles, sharks, whales. None inherited their weapons from one another, yet each arrived at the top of the same food chain. The ocean has also been reset by 5 mass extinctions. Each time, life began again. Each time, the seas rebuilt an apex predator, and each time what emerged was larger, stranger, or more specialized than what had come before. The largest predatory teeth ever discovered do not belong to a shark or a dinosaur. They belong to an extinct whale. Each tooth measured up to 36 centimeters, which is about 14 inches, and they were used to hunt other whales. None of these animals shared a close ancestor. None copied the blueprint of the one before. So why did the same answer keep appearing? Before we continue, I'm curious. Is this your first time here, or have you been down this rabbit hole with us before? Let me know in the comments. The journey begins in an ocean that had already been shaping monsters for hundreds of millions of years, long before anything on land had a name for fear, long before any particular predator earned its place in the fossil record. The ocean had already solved a problem that land would never fully escape. Every living body must negotiate with gravity, carrying its own mass through every movement, every hunt, and every moment of survival. Across forests, plains, and deserts, growing larger always demands a greater payment. Bones must thicken, joints must strengthen, muscles must bear increasing strain, until the body approaches a limit beyond which its own weight becomes an obstacle rather than an advantage. Even the immense titanosaur sauropods existed close to that structural boundary, where every step depended upon a careful balance between strength and burden. The sea writes a different agreement. The embrace of seawater lifts almost the entire body, reducing its apparent weight by roughly 96%. Flesh, bone, and muscle remain, yet the crushing load they would carry on land is largely shared by the surrounding water. What would have been an exhausting burden becomes something the ocean itself helps support. A body that might collapse beneath its own mass on solid ground can move with remarkable ease beneath the waves, suspended within an environment that removes the greatest penalty attached to becoming enormous. That change reaches far beyond simple size. Once the burden of weight fades into the background, entirely new possibilities emerge. A broader body glides through water with surprising efficiency during long journeys, spending proportionally less energy than a smaller one while maintaining steady movement. Greater mass also slows the loss of internal warmth, allowing large predators to remain active in colder regions where smaller hunters surrender precious heat more quickly. The ability to store vast reserves of energy within muscle and fat extends the time between successful hunts, making patience itself a valuable adaptation. Even collisions gain greater force, as tremendous momentum concentrates into a single strike delivered through jaws, fins, or the full weight of the body. The ocean rewards this progression rather than resisting it. Each increase in scale opens fresh advantages that encourage another increase, provided enough food can be gathered to sustain the growing frame. Instead of placing an unforgiving ceiling above every generation, the sea stretches that ceiling so far upward that evolution repeatedly discovers room for something larger still. The path toward gigantism becomes not an exception, but a direction that natural selection can revisit whenever circumstances allow. Movement itself also changes in profound ways beneath the surface. A land predator approaches across a landscape shaped by hills, trees, and open ground, almost always remaining tied to a single plane beneath the sky. Escape often depends upon recognizing the direction from which danger arrives. The ocean dissolves that certainty. Water surrounds every creature completely, transforming hunting into a fully three-dimensional pursuit, where distance exists in every direction at once. A predator may rise from darkness below, descend from brighter waters above, circle through open water beside its target, or weave between all of those paths during a single pursuit. Every direction becomes both avenue and vulnerability. Prey cannot rely upon keeping danger before its eyes, because danger no longer belongs to a single horizon. Instead, survival demands constant awareness of an environment that extends through depth as much as distance. Within this immense volume, enormous bodies gain yet another advantage. Long muscles generate sweeping strokes that carry heavy animals forward with graceful persistence. Broad fins and powerful tails turn tremendous mass into steady momentum, allowing vast predators to cross immense stretches of ocean without exhausting themselves. Their size becomes part of their efficiency, woven into every movement through water rather than fighting against it. This simple change, the lifting away of gravity's greatest burden, formed the first foundation beneath every extraordinary hunter that followed. Before sharper jaws, stronger armor, or keener senses entered the story, the ocean had already established the condition that made all those later innovations possible. It did not merely permit giants to exist, it created a world where becoming a giant could be the wiser path. Food is often imagined as something scattered across the sea, drifting in isolated pockets beneath an endless surface. The reality is far stranger. The greatest source of nourishment on Earth is spread so broadly that it almost disappears from view, carried within countless microscopic lives that gather wherever sunlight and nutrients meet. These tiny floating organisms, known as phytoplankton, form living expanses that can stretch across hundreds of thousands of kilometers, which is about 62,137 miles, turning vast regions of ocean into engines of continuous growth. Each individual organism is almost impossibly small, yet together they support a chain of life unlike anything found upon land. Minute drifting animals consume the phytoplankton. Larger creatures gather to feed upon them. Fish, squid, and countless other hunters build their lives upon that abundance, until the accumulated energy rises through the entire living network. Far below the surface, every enormous predator ultimately depends upon this invisible beginning, a harvest measured not by fields or forests, but by entire seas. Among the most remarkable expressions of this abundance are the immense gatherings of krill that inhabit the Southern Ocean. These small crustaceans travel in swarms so vast that their combined weight is estimated to exceed that of every human being alive. They transform microscopic life into concentrated nourishment, becoming one of the most important links between the smallest organisms and the largest animals ever to exist. Their presence allows giants to survive without exhausting the resources around them, because the foundation supporting those giants is itself immense beyond ordinary imagination. The consequences become clear when considering the demands of an enormous hunter, a predator measuring 20 meters, that is nearly 66 feet, cannot survive upon occasional success or scarce opportunities. Every movement requires tremendous stores of energy. Every powerful stroke through open water carries a cost that must eventually be repaid through food. On land, ecosystems rarely produce prey populations capable of sustaining such immense bodies over countless generations. The available energy reaches a limit long before predators can continue growing larger. The ocean follows another pattern entirely. Across much of its history, whenever gigantic predators emerged, equally productive food webs already existed beneath them. Vast schools of fish, thriving populations of marine reptiles during earlier ages, and later great gatherings of marine mammals created a dependable supply of nourishment that allowed extraordinary body sizes to remain practical. Gigantism was supported not by chance, but by an energy system broad enough to carry it. Depth adds another layer to this remarkable arrangement. Colder waters naturally retain greater amounts of dissolved oxygen than warmer seas near the surface. Rather than becoming barren expanses, many deeper regions provide conditions that support active life, especially where nutrient-rich currents rise and fall through the water column. Large predators move through these pathways with remarkable efficiency, following concentrations of prey that gather where food remains consistently available. The deepest hunting grounds are therefore not lifeless voids, but productive corridors woven into the greater circulation of the ocean itself. Another distinction unfolds with the passage of time. Forests lose their leaves, grasslands wither beneath frost, rivers swell and shrink with changing seasons, altering the lives that depend upon them. Deep beneath the waves, those familiar cycles lose much of their influence. Darkness remains constant. Temperatures change only gradually. Nutrients continue their patient circulation through waters that never experience winter in the way continents do. The result is an engine that seldom pauses. Energy continues moving from microscopic life toward immense hunters through every season, across immense spans of time, allowing each generation to inherit a world where nourishment flows with remarkable persistence. Combined with the freedom from gravity already granted by the surrounding sea, this uninterrupted abundance became another essential force behind the repeated appearance of the largest predators the world has ever known. Nothing in the ocean remains unchanged for very long. Every successful hunt leaves behind more than an empty space in the water. It also leaves behind the few prey that escaped, carrying traits that allowed them to survive when others did not. Across countless generations, those survivors pass their advantages forward. Slightly thicker armor, sharper senses, faster reactions, or a body shaped for a swifter turn become more common with each passing age. In response, predators capable of overcoming those new defenses leave behind more descendants of their own. Bit by bit, both hunter and hunted reshape one another through the steady rhythm of survival. No decision guides this process. No creature plans for the distant future. Tiny differences accumulate from one generation to the next, and natural selection patiently preserves those that improve the chances of living long enough to reproduce. The result is an endless exchange. Every improvement on one side becomes the beginning of another improvement on the other. Neither gains a lasting victory because each success immediately creates fresh pressure for change. This conversation between predator and prey has continued since the Cambrian, more than 540 million years ago. Across spans of time so vast that continents drift and mountains rise before wearing away again, the exchange has never truly ceased. Every remarkable hunter, preserved in stone, carries the marks of countless earlier struggles, each inherited adaptation reflecting victories won by distant ancestors against prey that had already become more difficult to capture. The outcome of this process is not simple variation, it is escalation. Bodies become more specialized as each generation adapts to an increasingly demanding world. Eyes gather more information from the surrounding water, jaws close with greater force. Limbs, fins, and tails refine their movements until even subtle improvements provide meaningful advantages. Defensive structures also grow more elaborate. Armor thickens, shells strengthen, camouflage becomes more convincing, and escape behaviors grow increasingly effective. Every advance on one side quietly encourages another on the opposite side. Because earlier forces have already removed many of the ordinary limits on size and supplied an extraordinary abundance of energy, this contest unfolds under conditions unlike those found on land. Larger bodies remain practical. Vast food resources continue supporting growing populations. Predators can afford to invest in greater strength, while prey populations remain numerous enough to fuel continual experimentation through natural selection. The ocean, therefore, allows this exchange to continue across a scale rarely matched elsewhere on Earth. With each passing chapter of geological history, familiar body plans begin to stretch beyond their earlier forms. A successful predator does not merely repeat the design of its ancestors. It often becomes faster, stronger, or more efficient because the animals it pursues have also changed. Likewise, prey cannot simply preserve yesterday's defenses. Every generation faces opponents carrying the accumulated refinements of millions of years. The cycle presses steadily onward, guided only by survival itself. Unlike many changes in nature that eventually settle into balance, this relationship possesses no lasting endpoint. Whenever one side gains an advantage, that advantage gradually fades as the opposing side adapts in return. Stability remains temporary, lasting only until another useful variation appears. Evolution continues, writing new possibilities into every generation, ensuring that the exchange remains active across immense spans of time. Seen from this wider perspective, the extraordinary predators that emerge throughout Earth's history become less like isolated marvels and more like successive expressions of the same enduring process. Each one inherits a world already shaped by countless earlier contests, then contributes new pressures that influence everything living beside it. Even extinction does not erase the deeper pattern. When familiar lineages disappear, surviving organisms continue the exchange from a different starting point, carrying forward the accumulated legacy of earlier struggles into entirely new forms. Within the ocean, this patient escalation has never rested. It continues refining strength against defense, speed against awareness, and innovation against innovation, allowing each age to produce hunters calibrated for prey that had already survived every challenge that came before. The earliest chapter of this story begins in a world that would scarcely be recognizable today. More than 520 million years ago, during the Cambrian period, life underwent an extraordinary expansion. Oceans that had once been inhabited mainly by simple organisms became filled with an astonishing diversity of complex animals. New body plans appeared in rapid succession, filling nearly every available way of living. For the first time, ecosystems grew intricate enough to support not only abundant prey, but also a hunter capable of ruling over all the rest. Among those early inhabitants emerged an animal unlike anything that had come before. It is known as Anomalocaris, a name meaning abnormal shrimp, although it shared little resemblance with the shrimp living today. Against a backdrop where many neighboring creatures measured only a few millimeters, this predator reached a length of about 1 meter, which is about 3 feet. In the Cambrian seas, such a body represented an extraordinary leap in scale, allowing it to dominate an environment filled with much smaller forms of life. Its appearance reflected a remarkable collection of evolutionary innovations working together. Positioned on either side of its head were large compound eyes containing as many as 16,000 individual lenses. These were among the most sophisticated visual organs known anywhere in the living world of that era. Rather than relying upon simple light detection, Anomalocaris could gather detailed information about movement and contrast across the surrounding water, giving it an immense advantage over prey whose senses remained comparatively limited. Extending from the front of its head were 2 long segmented appendages lined with curved spines. These flexible limbs reached outward before folding inward with careful precision, drawing struggling prey toward a circular mouth, unlike that of any modern vertebrate. Instead of jaws, the mouth consisted of overlapping plates arranged in a ring, creating a structure capable of gripping and crushing whatever its grasping limbs delivered. Every part of its anatomy contributed to a single purpose: locating prey efficiently, capturing it securely, and consuming it before escape became possible. Seen together, these features reveal something far greater than the success of one unusual animal. They represent the earliest known appearance of a complete apex predator, combining advanced sensory organs, specialized hunting tools, and commanding body size into a single living design. Earlier sections have revealed the broad forces shaping the ocean. Within Anomalocaris, those forces became visible in physical form for the first time, producing a hunter whose capabilities exceeded anything around it. The surrounding ecosystem did not remain unchanged beneath this new pressure. Fossil discoveries preserved trilobites bearing scars that healed during life, clear evidence that attacks sometimes failed and survivors continued living afterward. Those survivors carried forward whatever traits had allowed them to escape. Stronger shells, altered body shapes, or improved defensive behaviors gradually became more common across future generations. Even at this distant point in Earth's history, predator and prey were already reshaping one another through the steady exchange that would continue for hundreds of millions of years. The remarkable aspect of these ancient encounters lies not simply in their age, but in their familiarity. Although the participants were unlike any modern animals, the underlying pattern already resembled ecosystems that would appear countless ages later. Superior vision favored successful hunters. Better defenses favored successful prey. Each improvement encouraged another, preserving the continuous dialogue between adaptation and survival that had already begun flowing through the ocean. No fish yet swam through these waters with backbones. No reptiles, mammals, or birds had appeared. Vertebrates had not risen to dominate any environment. Yet the machinery guiding evolutionary escalation was already fully engaged, refining bodies through countless generations with remarkable consistency. Before bones strengthened into skeletons, and before jaws transformed the future of predation, the sea had already assembled an efficient hunter from entirely different biological materials. In this earliest flourishing of complex life, the ocean revealed that it required no familiar blueprint to produce dominance. Given enough time, abundant energy, and relentless competition, it fashioned its first great predator from the possibilities available, establishing a pattern that would echo across every age that followed. Some of the clearest evidence for the ocean's patient shaping of life does not come from the largest predators, but from the small, armored creatures that spent hundreds of millions of years trying to survive them. Trilobites drift through the fossil record in astonishing abundance, preserving a detailed history of adaptation written across countless generations. Their bodies changed gradually, yet those changes reveal one of the most enduring conversations ever recorded between hunter and prey. The earliest trilobites possessed relatively smooth outer shells that offered modest protection against the dangers surrounding them. For a time, those defenses proved sufficient within the communities they inhabited. Yet every successful predator altered the balance. Individuals carrying even slight advantages in attack left behind more descendants, increasing the pressure upon the animals they hunted. In turn, trilobites born with stronger protective features survived more often, passing those traits forward until entire populations slowly began to look different from their distant ancestors. Across roughly 270 million years, that transformation became remarkably visible. Many later trilobite species developed long defensive spines extending from the edges of their bodies, making them more difficult to seize or swallow. Their dorsal armor thickened into stronger protective plates capable of resisting greater force. What had once been a relatively uncomplicated shell became an increasingly elaborate structure shaped by millions upon millions of encounters with predators that never stopped improving. One of their most remarkable adaptations appeared not as a weapon, but as a movement. Many species evolved the ability to curl themselves into a tightly sealed sphere, drawing the vulnerable underside completely beneath overlapping armored plates. Much like certain modern terrestrial animals that roll into a protective ball, trilobites transformed their bodies into compact shields that concealed the softer tissues predators sought to reach. The outer shell became a continuous barrier, leaving few exposed openings through which an attack could easily succeed. Vision evolved alongside armor. Some trilobites developed eyes positioned to observe nearly every surrounding direction, reducing the blind areas from which danger might approach unnoticed. Rather than depending upon a single defensive strategy, these animals gradually assembled several layers of protection, combining awareness, physical barriers, and defensive posture into an integrated system shaped through countless generations of survival. Yet, even these impressive innovations never brought lasting security. Fossils have preserved enrolled trilobites inside the digestive remains of ancient predators, demonstrating that the defensive posture, effective though it often was, could still be overcome. Some hunters evidently evolved enough crushing strength or handling ability to consume prey, despite its carefully folded armor. Every improvement in defense gradually became another challenge waiting to be solved by natural selection acting upon predators. The pattern continued without interruption. Better protected prey favored stronger or more specialized hunters. More capable predators favored even better defended prey. Neither side permanently gained the upper hand because success itself transformed the environment faced by the next generation. Every adaptation altered the selective pressures acting upon the other participants within the ecosystem, creating an exchange that renewed itself continuously across immense stretches of geological time. Unlike a contest that ends when one competitor finally prevails, this evolutionary dialogue possesses no lasting conclusion. The disappearance of a successful defense simply encourages the emergence of another. Likewise, an effective hunting strategy remains advantageous only until prey populations gradually evolve ways to reduce its effectiveness. Stability exists only briefly before another useful variation begins reshaping the balance once again. The trilobite record therefore preserves something far more profound than the history of a single group of ancient marine animals. It captures the operating rhythm of the ocean itself, revealing an environment that continually rewards improvement while rarely allowing perfection to endure. Every shell, spine, and eye reflects pressures accumulated across countless generations, each modification carrying echoes of predators that forced change and survivors that answered it. Within these ancient armored travelers, the ocean left behind one of its most complete records of perpetual escalation, showing that while individual species eventually vanished, the process shaping them continued without interruption, steadily refining both defense and predation as the ages flowed onward. Evolution does not remain loyal to any single lineage. Whenever opportunity appears, it works with whatever living materials already exist, shaping familiar forms into something entirely unexpected. Long before fish grew into dominant hunters, and long before reptiles or mammals entered the sea, another branch of life answered the demands of the ancient ocean. From the lineage of arthropods emerged predators that demonstrated the remarkable flexibility of the same enduring process already unfolding beneath the waves. These animals are known as eurypterids, although they are often called sea scorpions because of their broad resemblance to the scorpions that later inhabited land. Their closest living relatives are found among horseshoe crabs and the arachnid lineage, yet they occupied a world entirely their own. Their flattened bodies, paddle-like limbs, and segmented tails allowed them to move efficiently through shallow marine environments, where they became some of the most capable hunters of their age. Among them rose the largest arthropod known to have existed, Jaekelopterus rhenaniae. Estimates suggest that this remarkable predator reached between 2.3 and 2.5 meters in length, that is nearly between 7.5 and 8.2 feet. Even measured against much later animals, its scale remains extraordinary. Within the Silurian seas, where no giant vertebrate predators yet existed, such dimensions placed it among the dominant rulers of its environment. Its enormous size becomes even more striking when viewed through individual fossil discoveries. One preserved claw, recovered after hundreds of millions of years within ancient rock, measures nearly half a meter, that is nearly 1.6 feet, by itself. This single structure reveals both the impressive proportions of the animal and the formidable equipment it carried into every encounter. The claw ended in powerful grasping pincers, capable of seizing prey before bringing it closer for consumption, serving as both weapon and tool within an ecosystem shaped by relentless competition. Around 430 million years ago, during the Silurian period, the seas remained profoundly different from those familiar today. Large fish had not yet risen to dominate marine ecosystems. Reptiles had not appeared. Mammals belonged to an unimaginably distant future. Yet the absence of those later groups did not leave the oceans without powerful hunters. Instead, arthropods occupied roles that would eventually pass to entirely different branches of the tree of life, proving that ecological opportunity matters more than ancestry alone. The body of Jaekelopterus rhenaniae reflected careful refinement, rather than simple enlargement. Compound eyes gathered information across the surrounding water, while broad swimming appendages provided steady movement through coastal habitats. Its protective outer skeleton offered strength without sacrificing flexibility, allowing it to pursue prey while remaining well defended against rivals. Every feature represented another adjustment shaped through countless generations of selection, gradually producing an animal capable of ruling the marine communities in which it lived. What makes these ancient giants especially meaningful is not merely their impressive appearance, but what they reveal about the deeper pattern governing ocean life. Earlier predators had already shown that sophisticated hunters could emerge from unfamiliar designs. The rise of giant eurypterids expanded that lesson dramatically. The same environmental forces responsible for producing earlier apex predators proved equally capable of transforming an entirely different group into dominant hunters. Nothing within the ocean insisted that only one kind of creature could occupy the highest place in the food web. Whenever ecological conditions favored large predators, evolution simply drew from whichever lineage happened to be available. Arthropods answered that opportunity first. Much later, fish would do the same. Still later, reptiles, sharks, and mammals would each follow remarkably similar paths, despite sharing very different histories. The giant sea scorpions therefore stand as one of the earliest demonstrations that the ocean was never constructing a single perfect predator. Instead, it repeatedly refined different living foundations toward comparable outcomes, allowing unrelated animals to arrive independently at commanding size, specialized weaponry, and ecological dominance through the steady influence of the same enduring pressures that continued shaping life across the ages. Sometimes, the history of life changes through countless tiny adjustments spread across millions of years. At other moments, evolution introduces an entirely new possibility, a structure so transformative that every ecosystem surrounding it begins to change in response. Around 420 million years ago, during the Silurian period, one such transformation emerged beneath the sea. Fish evolved jaws, not as modifications of an earlier biting apparatus, but from supporting arches that had once served the gills alone. An organ originally associated with breathing became the foundation of one of the most influential hunting tools ever to appear. Before this innovation, marine predators relied upon very different methods of obtaining food. Some drew prey inward by creating powerful currents of water. Others grasped soft bodies with specialized limbs or consumed tiny drifting organisms through various forms of filter feeding. These approaches could be remarkably effective within their own ecological settings, yet they shared an important limitation. None allowed a vertebrate to seize prey and apply concentrated closing force capable of cutting, crushing, or piercing living tissue with precision. The appearance of jaws changed that balance immediately, at least by the patient measure of geological time. For the first time, vertebrate predators could grip struggling animals securely instead of depending entirely upon suction or chance positioning. A closing mouth became an active weapon, capable of holding prey during escape attempts and directing force exactly where it would have the greatest effect. Feeding itself became faster, more versatile, and vastly more efficient across an expanding variety of prey. Natural selection responded without hesitation. Animals fortunate enough to possess slightly stronger armor survived encounters that claimed others. Those capable of accelerating more rapidly or changing direction with greater agility escaped attacks that previously would have ended their lineage. Patterns upon shells and bodies that blended more effectively with surrounding habitats gained fresh importance as concealment became another path toward survival. Generation after generation, these advantages accumulated, preserving descendants whose ancestors had endured a world newly shaped by biting predators. The ocean therefore entered another stage of its enduring dialogue between offense and defense. Every improvement in jaw strength encouraged improvements in protection, awareness, or escape. Those new defenses then rewarded predators possessing still greater efficiency. The rhythm already established during earlier ages continued, yet the introduction of jaws expanded the possibilities available to every participant within that exchange. A new tool had entered the evolutionary workshop, and countless future adaptations would be built around it. Among the earliest vertebrates to benefit from this remarkable innovation were the placoderms, heavily armored fishes that spread rapidly through marine environments within only a few million years. Their success did not arise from armor alone. In several species, the broad bony plates covering the head became integrated into the jaw itself, allowing the entire skull to participate in generating force. Rather than depending solely upon jaw muscles, these animals transformed much of the front of the body into a single coordinated feeding mechanism. This arrangement offered extraordinary mechanical advantages. Thick cranial plates distributed stress across a rigid framework, permitting powerful bites while protecting the head from the tremendous forces produced during feeding. Armor, therefore, served two purposes at once. It defended the animal from attack while simultaneously strengthening the very structure responsible for capturing prey. Protection and predation became parts of the same anatomical design, illustrating how evolution often reshapes existing features into entirely new functions instead of creating them from nothing. Across the ancient seas, countless lineages now faced an environment fundamentally altered by this innovation. Survival increasingly depended upon responding to predators capable of grasping, crushing, and controlling prey with unprecedented effectiveness. Every generation carried the memory of that pressure within inherited anatomy, preserving successful variations while quietly discarding those that could no longer endure. The ocean had not abandoned the evolutionary process that had shaped its earliest hunters. It had simply provided that process with a more powerful instrument, allowing the same enduring forces to produce predators of even greater capability while inviting every surrounding form of life to answer in kind. By the late Devonian period, the long conversation between predator and prey had already been unfolding for well over 100 million years. Countless refinements had accumulated, each generation inheriting the successful experiments of those before it. From this enduring process emerged one of the clearest demonstrations of what the ocean could accomplish when all of its guiding forces converged within a single animal. Its name was Dunkleosteus terrelli, and it inhabited shallow seas covering regions that are now North America, Europe, and Morocco between roughly 382 million and 358 million years ago. At first glance, one feature seems almost impossible. This immense predator possessed no true teeth. Instead, the forward edges of its upper and lower jaw were formed from thick bony plates that projected into broad, sharpened blades. As these cutting surfaces wore down through repeated use, the motion of the jaws grinding against one another continuously restored their edges. Rather than replacing damaged teeth throughout life, the weapon renewed itself through ordinary feeding, remaining effective without ever needing an entirely new set. The design reflected remarkable mechanical efficiency. Every successful bite maintain the very structure responsible for future bites, allowing the predator to retain formidable cutting power throughout its lifetime. Evolution had produced a hunting instrument that sharpened itself simply by performing its intended task. Few later predators, despite possessing true teeth, achieved such an elegant balance between durability and function. Its bite was among the most powerful ever estimated for an aquatic vertebrate. Researchers calculate that the closing force at the tip of the jaws approached roughly 8,000 pounds per square inch. By comparison, the modern saltwater crocodile, widely regarded as one of the strongest living biters, produces approximately 3,700 pounds per square inch. Even allowing for the natural uncertainty that accompanies fossil reconstruction, Dunkleosteus appears to have generated more than twice the crushing force of one of today's most formidable reptiles. Power alone, however, did not define its hunting strategy. The jaws could swing open in less than 1/20th of a second. That rapid movement produced a sudden pressure difference in the surrounding water, drawing both water and nearby prey directly toward the mouth before the cutting plates snapped shut. Instead of relying entirely upon prolonged pursuit, the predator transformed the surrounding water into part of the capture mechanism itself. Prey crossing within striking distance could be pulled inward almost as quickly as they recognized the danger. Its overall size has remained the subject of continuing scientific discussion. Earlier reconstructions suggested a length approaching 10 meters, which is about 33 feet, with a body weighing several tons. More recent studies favor a somewhat shorter but considerably broader animal, emphasizing powerful proportions over extreme length. Although precise measurements continue to be refined, as new evidence appears, every reconstruction agrees upon one central conclusion. Dunkleosteus ranked as the largest and most dominant predator within the marine ecosystems it inhabited. For an estimated span between 20 million and 25 million years, this armored hunter occupied the highest position in its food web. That interval exceeds the entire period separating modern humans from many of the earliest members of the human lineage. Across those immense ages, generations of marine life evolved beneath the constant influence of its presence, adapting to an apex predator whose anatomy represented the accumulated results of countless earlier evolutionary refinements. Within Dunkleosteus, the ocean demonstrated something profoundly important. Earlier hunters had introduced powerful ideas, improved vision, grasping limbs, protective armor, and eventually jaws. This animal gathered many of those advances into a single integrated design, combining overwhelming bite force, self-maintaining weapons, rapid prey capture, and commanding size within one body. It stood not merely as another successful predator, but as one of the earliest complete demonstrations of how the ocean's enduring process could repeatedly assemble extraordinary hunters from the materials available, refining them until every feature served the relentless demands of survival. The remains of an ancient predator often preserve far more than the outline of its body. Hidden within the rocks are traces of meals, injuries, and behaviors that no skeleton alone could ever reveal. In the case of Dunkleosteus torelli, these scattered clues offer a rare glimpse into the deeper logic shaping the ocean's greatest hunters. They show not simply what this remarkable animal looked like, but how it lived, what it consumed, and the evolutionary compromises that accompanied its extraordinary success. Among the most revealing discoveries are compact masses of indigestible material associated with the digestive system of Dunkleosteus. These dense collections contain broken fragments of bone, shell, and hard skeletal tissue that had been crushed during feeding before later being expelled from the body. In much the same way that modern owls regurgitate compact pellets containing material their digestive systems cannot process, Dunkleosteus appears to have discarded the toughest remains after extracting the nourishment surrounding them. Those compressed remains carry an important message. They demonstrate that this predator regularly hunted animals protected by substantial armor, rather than relying only upon softer prey that required little effort to consume. Shells that resisted ordinary attacks became little more than temporary obstacles beneath the immense force generated by its self-sharpening jaws. The ocean had produced a hunter capable of overcoming defenses that earlier predators might have found nearly impossible to breach, showing once again how every improvement in prey eventually encouraged an equally remarkable advance in predation. The fossil record preserves another, even more revealing detail. Certain bones belonging to Dunkleosteus bear bite marks whose shape matches the distinctive cutting surfaces of its own jaws. These injuries are not random damage caused after death. Their geometry strongly indicates that individuals sometimes attacked members of their own species. Whether driven by territorial conflict, competition, or periods when preferred prey became difficult to obtain, cannibalism formed part of the ecological reality inhabited by this formidable animal. That evidence reveals an important turning point in the evolutionary process. Once an apex predator becomes powerful enough to overcome nearly every other creature sharing its environment, the greatest remaining challenge often comes from rivals possessing the same extraordinary abilities. Competition gradually shifts inward. The strongest hunter no longer measures itself primarily against weaker prey, but against others built according to the same successful design. In this way, natural selection continues operating even after dominance has apparently been achieved. The anatomy of Dunkleosteus also reveals that remarkable power rarely arrives without cost. Its head carried immense plates of protective bone supporting the crushing mechanism of its jaws. Such massive construction undoubtedly provided tremendous strength, yet it also added considerable weight to the front of the body. Most paleontologists conclude that this predator probably lacked the sustained speed displayed by many later marine hunters possessing lighter skeletons and more streamlined forms. Instead of relying upon prolonged pursuit across open water, Dunkleosteus appears to have favored overwhelming force delivered across short distances. A rapid opening of the jaws drew prey within reach before the immense closing pressure completed the attack. The evolutionary bargain becomes visible within its very proportions. Mobility surrendered part of its importance so that durability and destructive power could reach exceptional levels. The surrounding environment rewarded that exchange because the ecological conditions of the late Devonian favored an animal capable of crushing heavily armored prey more than one built for endless pursuit. This balance between gain and sacrifice appears repeatedly throughout the history of life. Evolution does not create perfection. It assembles combinations of strengths that remain successful under particular circumstances, even when those strengths introduce meaningful limitations elsewhere. Every dominant predator carries hidden compromises alongside its obvious advantages, preserving only the features that contribute most effectively to survival within its own age. For approximately between 20 million and 25 million years, that remarkable balance remained astonishingly effective. The seas accepted immense armor instead of greater speed, crushing force instead of delicate precision, and overwhelming mechanical power instead of effortless agility. During that long interval, the ancient ocean judged those choices successful, allowing Dunkleosteus to stand as one of the clearest demonstrations of how its relentless evolutionary process could shape a predator perfectly suited to the world that surrounded it. No rain in the ocean lasts forever. Even the most successful predators exist within a world that is itself constantly changing, where forces far larger than any individual species reshape entire ecosystems with patient certainty. The long dominance of Dunkleosteus eventually came to an end, not because another hunter surpassed it in strength, but because the environment supporting its existence began to unravel across the planet. Between approximately 375 million and 359 million years ago, Earth experienced a prolonged biological crisis, now known as the Late Devonian extinction. Unlike a single catastrophic event unfolding in an instant, this extinction occurred through several distinct pulses spread across millions of years. Each wave removed species that had flourished for vast stretches of time, gradually transforming marine ecosystems until familiar communities disappeared almost completely. The losses reached an extraordinary scale. Scientists estimate that roughly 75% of all species vanished during this interval, with life in the oceans suffering the greatest consequences. Coral reefs collapsed across broad regions. Numerous groups of fishes, invertebrates, and marine plants declined or disappeared altogether. Food webs that had taken millions upon millions of years to assemble fragmented under pressures that affected nearly every level of the ecosystem. Among the leading explanations for this crisis is the widespread loss of dissolved oxygen from large portions of the world's oceans. During this same period, the earliest great forests expanded across the continents. Their roots altered soils in ways that greatly increased the movement of nutrients into rivers. Those nutrients eventually reached coastal seas, encouraging enormous blooms of microscopic algae. When those blooms died, they sank into deeper waters, where decomposition consumed tremendous quantities of dissolved oxygen. Vast marine regions gradually became unable to support many forms of complex animal life. The consequences spread outward through every ecological relationship. Animals, requiring well-oxygenated water, found their habitats shrinking. Populations became isolated. Food chains weakened as one disappearance triggered another. The ocean that had supported flourishing communities for tens of millions of years slowly became a more difficult place in which to survive. Extinction advanced, not only through direct environmental stress, but also through the collapse of the intricate biological connections linking predators, prey, and countless intermediate forms. Among the greatest casualties were the placoderms, the armored fishes that had once represented one of evolution's most remarkable achievements. Their disappearance was absolute. Not merely a few prominent species, nor only the giant predators, but the entire lineage vanished from the fossil record. A body plan refined across approximately 100 million years of evolution ended without leaving direct descendants. Every variation of those heavily armored jaws, every specialized adaptation accumulated through countless generations, disappeared within what is, in geological terms, a remarkably brief span. This complete loss reveals an important truth about the ocean's long history. Evolution preserves no permanent favorites. Success, measured across millions of years, offers no guarantee against environmental change. A lineage may dominate its age with extraordinary effectiveness, yet still disappear when the conditions supporting that success no longer exist. Natural selection rewards adaptation only to the present world, never to worlds that have not yet arrived. Yet the broader evolutionary process did not vanish alongside the placoderms. The disappearance of one dominant group created opportunities that had previously remained unavailable. Ecological roles, once occupied by armored giants, suddenly stood vacant. Food sources persisted where consumers had disappeared. Habitats, once defended by powerful predators, opened to new arrivals carrying different combinations of inherited traits. The extinction, therefore, represents more than an ending. It reveals another enduring characteristic of the ocean itself. Individual species, even entire branches of the tree of life, may come and go, but the deeper forces shaping marine ecosystems continue operating without interruption. As one lineage fades from existence, others inherit the altered world left behind, bringing with them fresh possibilities that natural selection immediately begins to refine. The ancient seas had lost the formidable hunters that once ruled their waters, but the enduring process beneath that history had not weakened. It simply turned its attention toward the surviving creatures, beginning another long chapter of transformation as life slowly reorganized itself within an ocean forever reshaped by change. When a forest recovers after fire, the returning landscape rarely resembles the one that came before. Different species arrive first, familiar spaces are occupied by new forms of life, and fresh relationships gradually emerge from the absence left behind. The ancient oceans followed much the same pattern. After the devastation of the late Devonian extinction, the seas did not remain diminished for long. Evolution immediately began working with the survivors, reshaping ecosystems that had lost their former rulers into something entirely new. Among those survivors were sharks. They had already inhabited the oceans throughout the Devonian period, yet for much of that time they occupied secondary, predatory roles, while armored fishes dominated the highest positions within marine food webs. The disappearance of the placoderms transformed that balance almost overnight by geological standards. Ecological opportunities that had remained unavailable for millions of years suddenly stood open, and sharks expanded steadily into the vacant roles left behind. The Carboniferous and Permian periods became an era of remarkable rebuilding rather than prolonged decline. Marine communities diversified across broad stretches of the world's oceans, assembling new combinations of predators and prey from the lineages that had endured the extinction. Early sharks spread into many habitats. Cephalopods continued refining their remarkable mobility and intelligence. Primitive relatives of later reptiles explored coastal environments, while descendants of giant sea scorpions still occupied important ecological positions. Every surviving branch of life participated in constructing a fresh marine world. Rather than restoring the ecosystems that had vanished, evolution assembled entirely different ones. Familiar ecological roles returned, but they were increasingly filled by unrelated animals carrying distinct anatomical solutions. The enduring pressures of the ocean remained unchanged, yet the biological materials available to respond had shifted. Once again, natural selection began refining whichever lineages proved most capable of meeting those demands. One of the most fascinating experiments from this interval belonged to a distant shark relative known as Helicoprion. At first glance, its jaws appear almost impossible. Instead of arranging teeth in orderly rows like those of modern sharks, Helicoprion developed a remarkable spiral structure within its lower jaw. New teeth formed continuously near the center of the spiral, while older teeth remained attached, producing a tightly coiled whorl unlike anything known among living vertebrates. For more than 100 years, paleontologists struggled to understand this extraordinary arrangement. Because early discoveries preserved only the unusual spiral without much of the surrounding skeleton, researchers proposed a remarkable variety of interpretations. Some believed the structure projected outward like a circular saw. Others imagined it extending from the snout or serving entirely different purposes unrelated to feeding. Only after additional fossil discoveries and advanced imaging techniques became available did scientists conclude that the spiral occupied the lower jaw, functioning as a specialized feeding mechanism capable of slicing prey with remarkable efficiency. Whether viewed as an anatomical curiosity or a successful evolutionary innovation, Helicoprion reveals something important about this period of rebuilding. The ocean was not merely replacing what had been lost, it was exploring entirely new possibilities. Jaw structures, hunting strategies, and methods of processing prey continued evolving in directions that no earlier predator had attempted. The disappearance of dominant lineages created room for experimentation rather than simple repetition. Across these recovering seas, body plans continued changing in response to familiar pressures. Some predators favored speed, others developed increasingly specialized feeding mechanisms. Different solutions emerged because evolution possesses no preferred design, only successful outcomes shaped by the conditions of each particular age. Every generation carried inherited variations into environments still recovering from extinction, allowing natural selection to preserve whichever traits proved most effective. Looking backward across hundreds of millions of years, these oceans may appear like a peaceful interval separating more famous chapters of prehistoric history. The fossil record tells a different story. Beneath the surface, countless evolutionary pathways were unfolding simultaneously as ecosystems regained complexity and stability. Predators refined unfamiliar weapons, prey answered with new defenses, and surviving lineages steadily expanded into opportunities left vacant by extinction. The rebuilding had already begun in earnest. Long before the next great giants appeared, the ancient ocean was patiently assembling the biological foundations from which another remarkable generation of apex predators would eventually emerge. There are moments in the history of life when the rhythm of evolution seems almost uninterrupted, each generation passing its inheritance into the next with only gradual change. Then there are moments when that rhythm fractures so completely that the world emerging afterward scarcely resembles the one before. Near the close of the Permian period, the oceans reached one of those rare turning points when nearly every established pattern of marine life approached collapse within a remarkably brief span of geological time. Around 252 million years ago, Earth entered the biological catastrophe now known as the Permian-Triassic extinction. No extinction before or since has matched its scale. Earlier crises had removed dominant groups and transformed ecosystems, yet this event reached into nearly every corner of the planet at once, altering oceans, coastlines, and continents together. The great evolutionary machine that had continued operating through countless earlier disruptions now encountered its harshest examination. The driving force appears to have begun beneath what is now Siberia, where an immense episode of volcanic activity erupted across an extraordinary landscape. Lava eventually spread across roughly 2 million square kilometers, which is about 772,000 square miles, forming one of the largest volcanic provinces ever created. These eruptions continued over immense stretches of time, releasing staggering quantities of carbon dioxide together with sulfur-bearing gases into the atmosphere. Rather than producing a brief disturbance, the eruptions steadily reshaped the planet's climate until multiple environmental crises unfolded together. Global temperatures climbed as greenhouse gases accumulated. Ocean chemistry shifted toward increasing acidity, making it more difficult for many marine organisms to construct shells and protective skeletons. At the same time, widespread oxygen depletion spread through enormous regions of seawater, Life that depended upon abundant dissolved oxygen found fewer and fewer places where survival remained possible. These pressures did not operate separately. Each intensified the others, creating an interconnected chain of environmental change that reached from the sea surface to the deepest marine basins. The result surpassed almost every other biological disaster preserved within the fossil record. Scientists estimate that approximately 96% of all marine species disappeared during this extinction. The significance of that figure extends beyond the number itself. It does not describe the loss of individual animals alone. It represents the disappearance of entire evolutionary lineages, many carrying hundreds of millions of years of accumulated adaptations. Branches of life's history that had survived countless previous environmental changes simply ended, leaving no descendants to continue their stories. Marine ecosystems that had once supported intricate networks of predators, grazers, scavengers, and filter feeders became dramatically simplified. Ancient communities assembled over immense spans of time dissolved into scattered remnants. Coral reefs nearly vanished. Many specialized predators disappeared entirely. Countless ecological relationships that had shaped ocean life for ages were broken almost simultaneously, leaving behind environments unlike anything that had existed before. Yet even within devastation, complete emptiness never arrived. A small collection of resilient survivors endured where conditions briefly remained favorable or where their flexible lifestyles allowed adaptation to extraordinary hardship. Most belonged to relatively small, opportunistic, generalist species capable of exploiting whatever limited resources remained available. They lacked the immense size, elaborate specialization, and refined ecological roles that had characterized many earlier inhabitants, yet they possessed something more valuable during a planetary crisis: the capacity to persist when nearly everything else could not. The oceans that remained after the extinction seemed almost unfamiliar compared with those that had flourished before. Diversity had contracted to a fraction of its former richness, while ecological complexity retreated with it. Even so, the ancient evolutionary process itself had not disappeared. It had merely been stripped back to its smallest surviving foundation. From those scattered survivors, natural selection continued its patient work, preserving whatever traits allowed life to endure through the most severe biological crisis our planet has ever known. The oceans did not linger in ruin for as long as their scars might suggest. Across the immense scale of geological time, recovery arrived with remarkable speed. Within roughly 10 to 15 million years after the Great Dying, which is about 6.2 to 9.3 miles, the foundations of entirely new marine ecosystems had already begun to emerge. Apex predators once again appeared among expanding food webs, not because the earlier rulers had returned, but because evolution had found an entirely different source from which to build. This time, the raw material came from the land. Reptiles that had spent generations adapting to forests, riverbanks, and dry ground gradually ventured back into coastal waters. Their ancestors possessed sturdy limbs for walking, lungs suited for breathing air, and skeletons shaped to resist gravity. None of those features had evolved for life beneath the waves. Yet once these animals entered the sea, the familiar forces that had shaped countless earlier predators began working upon them with unwavering consistency. The process that guided this transformation is known as convergent evolution. It describes a remarkable pattern in which unrelated groups of animals gradually acquire similar body forms because they face the same environmental demands. Shared ancestry is not required. Similar challenges alone are enough. Whenever different creatures encounter identical physical pressures over immense spans of time, natural selection repeatedly discovers comparable solutions. The ocean has demonstrated this principle again and again across Earth's history, refining bodies according to the same mechanical rules, regardless of where those bodies first evolved. Early relatives of the ichthyosaurs preserve one of the clearest records of this transformation. Their fossils reveal a gradual progression rather than an abrupt change. Limbs that once supported weight across solid ground became shorter with each passing lineage. Flexible joints gave way to broad paddles, better suited for steering through water. The trunk lengthened into a more streamlined shape that reduced resistance while swimming. Even the position of the nostrils shifted steadily upward across the skull, allowing each breath to be taken with less of the head rising above the surface. The tail changed as well. Structures once designed primarily for balance, while walking gradually flattened into powerful flukes, capable of driving the body forward through open water. Each alteration alone appears modest, yet together they formed an entirely different kind of animal. Within only a few million years, evolution had reshaped terrestrial reptiles into swift marine hunters whose bodies reflected the demands of the sea far more than the landscapes where their distant ancestors had once lived. Nothing about this transformation suggests hesitation. The same environmental pressures described earlier continued operating without interruption after the extinction. Buoyancy reduced the burden imposed by gravity. Abundant marine food webs once again supported increasingly large bodies. The enduring contest between predator and prey resumed as surviving ecosystems expanded in complexity. Every generation inherited slight differences, and those differences that improved survival beneath the waves accumulated steadily until familiar terrestrial features became almost impossible to recognize. The emerging ichthyosaurs would eventually resemble modern dolphins in overall outline, despite sharing no close evolutionary relationship. Their similarities arose not from common ancestry, but from the remarkable consistency of the ocean itself. Streamlined bodies, efficient tails, and carefully balanced proportions represented practical responses to moving rapidly through dense water. Evolution arrived at nearly identical designs because the underlying physical challenges remained the same, regardless of the animal attempting to solve them. The rebuilding of marine predators, therefore, reveals another enduring quality of the ancient evolutionary machine. It never depended upon preserving a particular lineage. When one branch of life disappeared, another became available. The oceans accepted those newcomers without preference, applying the same patient sequence of selection that had shaped arthropods, armored fishes, and countless earlier hunters. Given enough time, familiar pressures transformed unfamiliar beginnings into another generation of giants, continuing the long and uninterrupted story written beneath the surface. Long before the oceans had fully recovered the richness they once possessed, a new kind of hunter was already stretching the limits of size and performance. The rebuilding that followed the greatest extinction in Earth's history did not proceed cautiously. Instead, natural selection accelerated wherever opportunity remained, refining bodies with remarkable efficiency until some of the largest marine predators yet seen began moving through ancient seas. The pace of that transformation remains one of the clearest demonstrations of how rapidly evolution can respond when an ecological summit stands empty. By the Middle Triassic period, ichthyosaurs had already attained dimensions comparable to those of modern sperm whales. Among the most extraordinary was Shonosaurus sicaniensis, discovered in what is now British Columbia. Estimates place its length at approximately 21 meters, which is about 69 feet. Even more remarkable than its size was the short interval required to achieve it. Only around 20 million years had passed since the Permian-Triassic extinction, an interval that represents little more than a brief chapter within Earth's immense geological history. Such rapid enlargement did not occur through chance alone. The oceans still offered the same fundamental advantages that had shaped countless earlier predators. Buoyancy continued relieving much of the burden imposed by gravity, allowing bodies to expand beyond the practical limits faced by animals living upon land. Vast marine food webs supplied the energy required to sustain enormous hunters, while the enduring contest between predator and prey rewarded every improvement in speed, endurance, perception, and efficiency. Once reptiles returned to the sea, these familiar pressures immediately began refining them toward forms capable of dominating open water. Perhaps the most striking feature of these immense ichthyosaurs was not their size, but their overall design. Although descended from terrestrial reptiles, their bodies gradually converged upon an outline remarkably similar to that of modern dolphins and fast-swimming tuna. The head blended smoothly into a streamlined torso, limbs transformed into compact steering flippers. The tail developed into a broad vertical fluke capable of delivering powerful thrust with each stroke. Every contour reduced resistance while allowing energy to be converted into forward motion with extraordinary efficiency. This resemblance did not arise because these animals shared close ancestry with dolphins or tuna. Their evolutionary histories remained entirely separate. Instead, each lineage encountered the same physical realities imposed by moving rapidly through dense seawater. The ocean repeatedly favored bodies that minimized drag while maximizing propulsion and stability. Across vast stretches of time, unrelated animals arrived independently at nearly identical engineering solutions, demonstrating once again the remarkable consistency of convergent evolution. The emergence of giant ichthyosaurs also reveals something profound about the evolutionary process itself. When the position of apex predator became vacant after the Great Extinction, evolution did not preserve that vacancy for long. It explored every available opportunity through countless generations, retaining successful variations while discarding ineffective ones. Whatever biological material remained after catastrophe became the foundation for another ascent toward gigantism. The machine required no predetermined blueprint. It simply acted upon surviving life until another dominant hunter emerged. Evidence preserved within fossilized bones suggests that at least some ichthyosaurs possessed warm-blooded metabolism rather than relying entirely upon surrounding water temperatures. Such a physiological strategy offered substantial advantages. Internal heat production supported stronger muscles, sustained activity over longer periods, and more dependable performance in colder waters where slower metabolisms became increasingly limited. Large body size further helped retain that internally generated warmth, allowing these predators to remain effective across broader regions of the ocean than many cold-blooded competitors could successfully occupy. The rebuilding of marine ecosystems, therefore, reached far beyond replacing what had been lost. It produced predators whose anatomy reflected millions of years of relentless refinement compressed into an astonishingly brief geological interval. Gigantism, streamlined design, elevated metabolism, and exceptional swimming efficiency emerged together because the same enduring forces continued shaping every generation. The oceans had once again transformed unfamiliar beginnings into magnificent hunters, revealing that whenever opportunity appeared, evolution responded with remarkable speed and unwavering precision. Sometimes the greatest creatures leave behind the smallest traces. Entire oceans may pass, continents may shift, and mountains may rise, yet the evidence for one of the largest animals ever to inhabit the sea can survive as only a handful of weathered bones. From those scattered remains, preserved through extraordinary coincidence, a forgotten giant has gradually returned to scientific view, offering another glimpse into the remarkable speed with which evolution reshaped life after catastrophe. In the month of February, during the year 2024, researchers formally described and named a new species, Livyatan severnensis. Although the fossil material remains fragmentary, careful anatomical comparison indicates an animal of astonishing scale. Current estimates suggest a length of approximately 25 meters, which is about 82 feet. If those estimates continue to withstand scientific examination, this immense reptile may represent the largest marine reptile yet identified, approaching within only a few meters, which is about several feet, of the greatest recorded lengths achieved by the modern blue whale. The story of its discovery carries an unusual elegance. Rather than emerging from a complete skeleton resting within ancient stone, the animal became known through separate fragments of an enormous lower jaw recovered years apart along the Somerset coast of England. One substantial section was discovered by a father and daughter searching for fossils among the coastal rocks. Another matching fragment had been collected independently by a different fossil hunter years earlier from the same stretch of shoreline. Each discovery seemed important on its own, yet neither revealed the true scale of the animal until both pieces were examined together. Once researchers recognized that the fragments belonged to the same kind of enormous jaw, the proportions began revealing themselves with surprising clarity. The dimensions of the preserved bone exceeded those of previously known giant ichthyosaurs, allowing comparisons with related species whose skeletons were more complete. By scaling upward from established anatomical relationships, scientists concluded that the original animal must have reached extraordinary proportions, transforming what first appeared to be isolated fossils into evidence for one of the greatest marine reptiles ever known. The rarity of such discoveries reminds us how incomplete the fossil record remains. Most ancient creatures disappear without leaving a single recognizable trace. Others survive only as scattered fragments waiting decades or even centuries before chance reunites pieces of the same story. In this case, patient observation accomplished what dramatic discoveries alone could not. Two separate finds, recovered by different people across different years, eventually combined into evidence for an animal whose immense body had vanished almost entirely from the geological record. Its significance extends well beyond its impressive dimensions. Livyatan severnensis lived near the close of the Triassic period, a time when ichthyosaurs had already undergone millions of years of continual refinement. They had begun as terrestrial reptiles, returning to coastal waters after the greatest extinction in Earth's history. Through generation after generation, the familiar forces of buoyancy, abundant marine resources, and relentless evolutionary competition reshaped those early pioneers into streamlined hunters, capable of crossing vast oceans with remarkable efficiency. The appearance of a creature approaching the dimensions of the largest living whale demonstrates that this evolutionary process had not reached a natural stopping point. Even after millions of years of successful adaptation, natural selection continued, favoring larger bodies wherever ecological conditions rewarded them. The upward trend had not stalled. It was still unfolding, producing ever greater scales from ancestors that once walked across solid ground. Livyatan, therefore, offers another revealing glimpse into the enduring character of the ancient evolutionary machine. It required neither a particular lineage nor an ideal starting point. Given surviving life, sufficient time, and the consistent physical rules imposed by the sea, it continued refining, enlarging, and reshaping whatever entered its influence. From reptiles that had only recently abandoned the land, it produced giants approaching the dimensions of the greatest animal living in the oceans today, revealing that even near the close of the Triassic, the long ascent toward marine gigantism remained unfinished. There came a time when no single hunter could claim unquestioned dominion over the sea. Instead, the ancient ocean supported several immense predators at once, each following a different solution to the same enduring challenge. They did not resemble one another closely, yet each represented another answer shaped by the same persistent forces. The waters had become broad enough, productive enough, and varied enough to sustain multiple giants whose lives overlapped in an intricate balance of pursuit, concealment, and overwhelming force. By the Jurassic period, that balance had matured into something remarkable. 3 separate apex predator lineages occupied the marine world simultaneously, each descended from different ancestors, each refined along its own evolutionary path. Rather than converging upon a single design, the ocean encouraged diversity among its largest hunters. Every successful strategy altered the environment for the others, creating an ever-changing network of competition that extended across open water, coastal shelves, and deeper realms below the sunlit surface. Ichthyosaurs remained masters of sustained pursuit. Their bodies retained the graceful streamlining that earlier generations had acquired, narrowing resistance as they crossed immense distances through open seas. Warm-blooded metabolism allowed many species to remain active across cooler waters, where slower reptiles faced greater limitations. Their crescent-shaped tails generated powerful thrust, while large eyes gathered precious light from dim environments beneath the waves. They chased swift prey with relentless endurance, relying upon speed, efficient movement, and rapid acceleration rather than overwhelming armor or brute force. Elsewhere, plesiosaurs followed a strikingly different design. Their unusually long necks extended graceful heads far beyond broad bodies, propelled by 4 muscular flippers. Instead of sweeping side to side like the tails of fishes, those flippers moved in coordinated strokes resembling underwater flight. This distinctive style of movement granted extraordinary maneuverability, allowing them to change direction with exceptional precision while moving through 3-dimensional space. A fish or squid drifting within reach might encounter little warning before narrow jaws darted forward from an unexpected angle, reaching where a shorter neck could never extend. The third lineage carried adaptation toward an altogether different destination. Pliosaurs abandoned elongated necks in favor of immense skulls supported by compact, muscular bodies. Every feature emphasized power. Massive jaws enclosed formidable teeth capable of gripping prey that rivaled their own impressive size. Thick neck muscles transmitted crushing force into each bite, while strong flippers propelled these predators through sudden bursts of acceleration. They occupied a role unlike that of their long-necked relatives, hunting not merely smaller animals but often pursuing other large marine reptiles whenever opportunity allowed. Together, these lineages transformed the Jurassic Ocean into a remarkably complex arena. No single predator excelled under every circumstance. Open water rewarded endurance and speed. Dense underwater landscapes favored careful maneuvering, encounters with large rivals demanded overwhelming force. Each successful adaptation altered the selective pressures experienced by the others. Faster pursuit encouraged improved escape. Greater maneuverability challenged direct attack. Increasing bite strength favored stronger defenses, larger bodies, or entirely new methods of avoiding detection. Evolution advanced simultaneously along several interconnected paths rather than a single upward climb. This overlapping competition reveals another characteristic of the ancient evolutionary process. It did not seek perfection through one final design. Instead, it explored multiple successful possibilities at the same time, preserving whichever forms continued meeting the demands imposed by their surroundings. Diversity itself became part of the system, with every dominant lineage helping shape the future direction of the others through constant ecological interaction. The Jurassic Sea therefore stands as more than an age remembered for remarkable reptiles. It represents a moment when the long evolutionary engine operated at extraordinary complexity, sustaining several immense predator dynasties together. Rather than producing one unforgettable monster, it fashioned an entire community of giants whose intertwined histories reveal that the greatest power of the ocean was never any single creature, but its continuing ability to create many different masters at once. Far below the brighter waters where smaller hunters scattered and schools of fish shifted with the currents, another form moved with a different purpose. It was not shaped merely to capture abundant prey or dominate ordinary competition. Every proportion of its body pointed toward a far narrower objective. This was a predator refined to confront creatures already standing near the summit of the marine world. The ocean had progressed beyond producing giants alone. It had begun creating hunters capable of hunting the giants. Among the most formidable of these reptiles were the thalassophonian pliosaurs, a name whose meaning may be understood as sea slaughtering. Their ancestry reached back through earlier marine reptiles, yet their bodies departed dramatically from the graceful outlines of long-necked relatives. Massive skulls occupied much of their total length, balanced by compact necks and immensely powerful shoulders that drove 4 broad flippers through the water with explosive force. Everything about their construction emphasized overwhelming strength delivered across the shortest possible distance. Some members of this lineage, including Pliosaurus and Kronosaurus, possessed heads reaching nearly 3 meters, that is nearly 10 feet, from the tip of the snout to the back of the skull. Those enormous jaws carried conical teeth shaped like 3-sided pyramids, each bearing paired cutting edges capable of gripping struggling prey with remarkable security. Along 2 faces of every tooth ran delicate grooves. These channels reduced the tendency for suction to hold the tooth within flesh during a powerful bite, allowing the jaws to withdraw and strike again with impressive efficiency instead of remaining momentarily trapped by the pressure created during penetration. Such adaptations transformed every attack into a sequence of rapid, crushing impacts rather than a single prolonged struggle. The skull itself functioned as an immense framework, distributing force across thick bone, while powerful jaw muscles generated bite strengths estimated to rival, and in some analyses even exceed, those reconstructed for Tyrannosaurus rex, a terrestrial predator frequently regarded as one of the strongest biters ever to walk upon land. Yet this immense force developed beneath the waves, where buoyancy removed many of the structural limits that gravity imposed upon equally massive hunters living above the surface. Power alone did not define these reptiles. Fossil evidence and comparisons with living marine predators indicate that many likely relied upon ambush rather than extended pursuit. Concealed beneath darker water, they could rise rapidly from below, approaching prey from an angle where vision offered little warning. Large marine reptiles cruising above would have observed only the dim surface until an immense skull surged upward beneath them. Modern great white sharks employ an astonishingly similar hunting method, despite belonging to an entirely different branch of the tree of life. Identical environmental demands shaped remarkably similar solutions across immense spans of evolutionary time, another expression of convergent evolution acting with relentless consistency. Recent discoveries have strengthened that picture. Along the Jurassic coastline of England, paleontologists described an extraordinary specimen during the year 2023. Its skull approached 2 meters, which is about 7 feet, in length, preserving teeth so formidable that the excavating researchers compared their appearance to those of an imagined union between a crocodile and Tyrannosaurus rex. The comparison reflected sheer visual impact rather than ancestry, emphasizing the immense scale and formidable construction revealed within the fossil. Even more revealing were marks preserved upon the neck bones of that same animal. They matched injuries expected from the bite of another pliosaur. The greatest hunters within this ecosystem did not exist beyond competition. They confronted rivals possessing the same immense strength, the same specialized weapons, and the same ecological demands. As distant echoes have already suggested, the pattern had appeared before in another age, when armored fish bore the scars of their own kind. Across vast intervals of geological history, the same principle emerged again. Once the evolutionary contest climbed high enough, the most formidable obstacle before an apex predator was often another member of its own lineage. The ancient ocean continued refining that relentless pattern without hesitation, shaping even its greatest hunters beneath the pressure of one another. The great marine hunters that had once ruled the Jurassic world did not endure forever. Their disappearance unfolded through separate extinction events long before the closing chapter of the Age of Reptiles. Yet, the ancient sea did not remain without dominant predators for long. Empty ecological roles rarely stayed vacant. As distant echoes throughout this journey have suggested, each vacancy became an invitation for another lineage to expand. The pattern emerged once again with remarkable speed as an entirely different branch of life entered the water and rose toward the summit. The newcomers were mosasaurs. They were neither fish nor dinosaurs, and they shared no close ancestry with the streamlined ichthyosaurs, whose bodies had once crossed the oceans with tireless endurance. Instead, they belonged to the lineage of lizards, standing much closer to the ancestors of modern monitor lizards and snakes. Their earliest forebears lived upon land, supported by sturdy limbs and breathing open air. Once they returned to the sea, familiar evolutionary pressures began reshaping them with striking consistency. Generation after generation, limbs transformed into broad paddles suited for powerful swimming. Bodies lengthened and became more streamlined, reducing resistance as they moved through open water. Their tails developed deep vertical fins that generated efficient thrust, while dense skeletons gradually gave way to lighter structures better suited to an aquatic existence. The process illustrates convergent evolution once again, the remarkable phenomenon in which unrelated animals independently acquire similar physical traits because they encounter nearly identical environmental pressures. The ocean repeatedly favored efficient swimmers, regardless of where their ancestors had begun. Their appearance within the fossil record occurred around 94 million years ago. Within only 10 million years, which is about 6.2 million miles of geological time, would make no sense, so this span is best understood simply as 10 million years. They had expanded across the world's oceans and established themselves as the dominant large predators almost everywhere suitable habitat existed. No previous transition in this long history unfolded with comparable speed. The vacant apex position left behind by earlier marine reptiles was occupied with astonishing efficiency, demonstrating once more that the evolutionary process required no particular lineage. It simply worked with whatever biological material remained available. Among these remarkable reptiles, Mosasaurus hoffmanii became the largest species presently known. Estimates suggest an animal approaching 17 meters, which is about 56 feet, from snout to tail. Its skull concealed an ingenious anatomical feature beyond sheer size. Behind the primary jaw articulation rested an additional joint that increased the flexibility of the entire feeding mechanism. Rather than limiting the mouth to the opening permitted by a single hinge, this arrangement allowed the jaws to spread considerably wider, making it possible to seize and swallow prey that otherwise would have exceeded the limits imposed by more rigid construction. This flexibility expanded dietary possibilities across a broad range of marine animals. Fish, turtles, seabirds, ammonites, and other marine reptiles all became potential prey, depending upon the size and habits of the individual species. Instead of specializing narrowly upon one source of food, many mosasaurs exploited whatever opportunities their surroundings presented. Such versatility may have contributed significantly to their remarkably rapid expansion across diverse marine ecosystems. Even so, dominance offered no immunity from competition. Fossil evidence preserves a revealing scene in which the remains of a juvenile Mosasaurus rested within the stomach contents of another mosasaur, Prognathodon kianda. The discovery records more than a single meal. It demonstrates that the greatest danger facing these immense reptiles could emerge from members of their own broader lineage. Across countless millions of years, despite repeated extinctions and entirely different anatomical designs, the same recurring pattern continued to surface. Whenever the highest predatory role became firmly established, competition eventually turned inward. The sea once again shaped an apex hunter, whose most formidable rival was another apex hunter remarkably like itself, continuing the ancient rhythm without interruption. Long before humanity assembled a meaningful history of ancient life, the evidence already rested within layers of stone, waiting beneath hillsides and riverbanks. For countless generations, those remains passed unnoticed or misunderstood, their true significance hidden not by distance or depth, but by the limits of human imagination. The ocean had preserved fragments of its immense past with extraordinary patience, carrying them across vast ages until curious hands finally uncovered one of the discoveries that would transform the study of life itself. Near the Meuse River in what is now the Netherlands, workers uncovered remarkable fossil remains during the year 1764. The immense skull differed from anything familiar to naturalists of the time. It possessed powerful jaws, imposing teeth, and proportions unlike those of ordinary animals known from the living world. Yet, the intellectual framework required to understand such a creature had not yet been built. The word dinosaur had not been created. Paleontology did not yet exist as a formal scientific discipline. Even the idea that entire species could vanish forever remained deeply uncertain. As scholars examined the fossil, explanations reflected the knowledge available to them. Some believed the skull belonged to an unusually large fish. Others suggested a crocodile. Still others saw similarities with the giant monitor lizards known from distant lands. Every proposal attempted to place the specimen within familiar categories because the possibility of an entirely vanished world seemed almost unimaginable. The fossil itself was genuine, yet the concepts needed to interpret it correctly had not evolved alongside its discovery. That single skull gradually became something greater than the remains of one extraordinary animal. It challenged assumptions that had guided natural philosophy for centuries. If no living creature resembled this immense marine reptile, then perhaps the living world represented only a fraction of everything that had ever existed. Such an idea carried profound consequences. It suggested that the history of life extended far beyond recorded civilization, and that nature possessed chapters completely absent from human memory. As additional fossils emerged from other regions, the picture became steadily clearer. Mosasaurus was not an isolated curiosity. It belonged to an entire lineage of immense marine reptiles that had flourished across ancient seas before disappearing completely. Their existence offered tangible evidence that extinction was not merely a theoretical possibility, but an observable reality recorded within stone itself. Species could arise, dominate their environments for immense spans of time, and ultimately vanish without leaving living descendants behind. This realization altered far more than the understanding of one remarkable reptile. It transformed the way humanity viewed the planet. The Earth was no longer perceived as a largely unchanging stage populated by familiar creatures since the beginning of history. Instead, it emerged as a dynamic world whose inhabitants changed continually across immense stretches of geological time. Entire ecosystems had appeared, prospered, and disappeared long before the first human communities existed to witness them. Within that expanding perspective, Mosasaurus became a symbol of something even larger. Its immense body represented only one moment in an evolutionary process that had already unfolded for hundreds of millions of years before any observer stood beside the Meuse River. Across that immense interval, the oceans repeatedly produced giant predators from different ancestral groups, refined them through relentless competition, and replaced them whenever changing conditions demanded new solutions. Humanity entered the story only at the very end, discovering scattered fragments of a narrative that had already been unfolding beyond imagination. The fossil beside the Meuse River, therefore, marks more than an important scientific discovery. It represents the moment when the ancient ocean began revealing the true scale of its forgotten history. For roughly 500 million years, the evolutionary process had continued without witness, shaping successive generations of marine giants beneath the waves. Only during the 18th century did human understanding finally begin to glimpse that immense continuum, recognizing that the greatest chapters of the ocean's past had always existed, patiently awaiting discovery within the stone itself. The turning point arrived from beyond the atmosphere, carried across the darkness of space by a wandering fragment that had traveled for ages without purpose until its path crossed that of Earth. Around 66 million years ago, an asteroid measuring between 10 and 15 kilometers, that is nearly 6.2 to 9.3 miles wide, struck the region now known as the Yucatan Peninsula in present-day Mexico. In a single geological moment, the long reign of the Cretaceous world came to an abrupt conclusion, and the ocean entered another profound transformation. The impact released an amount of energy beyond ordinary comparison. A tremendous pulse of heat swept across vast portions of the planet. Molten rock and shattered debris were launched high above the atmosphere before falling back through the skies. Sulfur-rich material and fine dust spread around the globe, forming a veil that greatly reduced the sunlight reaching the surface. Photosynthesis faltered across both land and sea as darkness lingered. Temperatures dropped as incoming solar energy diminished, only to rise again later as greenhouse gases accumulated within the atmosphere. The planet experienced a sequence of environmental shocks that unfolded with astonishing speed compared with the immense stretches of geological time that had come before. Within the oceans, those cascading changes reached every level of the food web. Tiny organisms drifting near the surface declined as light became scarce. Creatures that depended upon them soon followed. Larger hunters lost the abundant prey that had sustained them for millions of years. The disruption did not remain confined to one coastline or one basin. It spread through connected seas until ecosystems that had developed across immense intervals unraveled almost together. Among the losses were every known mosasaur species, each representing the latest expression of the ocean's remarkable ability to reshape life into dominant marine predators. The remaining great marine reptiles disappeared as well. Ancient lineages that had survived countless environmental changes finally reached their conclusion. For the first time since the distant years before the Triassic period, the seas no longer possessed a community of giant reptilian apex predators. The evolutionary experiments that had produced swift pursuit hunters, powerful ambush specialists, and enormous ocean giants had all ended within the same broad interval of planetary upheaval. Yet the pattern that had appeared repeatedly across the ages emerged once again. The disappearance of established rulers did not leave the highest ecological roles permanently vacant. The evolutionary process had never depended upon preserving a single successful design forever. Instead, it continually worked with whatever living material remained after catastrophe. Extinction removed familiar forms, but survival supplied new beginnings. Every previous reset had demonstrated that life did not simply restore what had been lost. It explored different pathways while responding to the same enduring environmental pressures. The oceans, therefore, became places of possibility as much as absence. Countless smaller survivors continued swimming through altered waters, carrying inherited traits that had not originally evolved for dominance but possessed unexpected potential. Some belonged to groups that had occupied supporting roles for immense spans of time. Others had remained comparatively modest, while larger predators commanded the seas above them. With the established giants gone, entirely different opportunities became available. This recurring pattern reveals the deepest principle governing the long history of marine evolution. The process does not preserve individual champions. It preserves adaptation itself. Whenever a dominant lineage disappears, selection continues, shaping whatever survivors can exploit the newly available conditions. Across hundreds of millions of years, the identities of the great predators have changed repeatedly, yet the ecological role itself has endured with remarkable persistence. Another complete turnover had begun. The familiar reptilian giants had passed into the fossil record, joining countless earlier lineages remembered only through stone. Even after one of the most consequential impact events in planetary history, the evolutionary process continued its patient work, searching among the remaining branches of life for the next form capable of inheriting the open sea. Some lineages seem to move through Earth's history like enduring currents, seldom commanding the center of the stage, yet never fully disappearing from it. Sharks belonged to that remarkable company. They had already inhabited the seas since roughly 450 million years ago, surviving through ages that witnessed the rise and disappearance of countless rivals. Across every great biological crisis already traced through this story, they remained present, adapting with measured persistence while larger predators claimed the highest places within the marine world. During the Devonian period, armored hunters dominated the upper reaches of the food web. Later, vast marine reptiles transformed the oceans into arenas occupied by pursuit specialists, ambush experts, and colossal predators unlike anything alive today. Throughout those immense intervals, sharks rarely occupied the foremost position. They persisted instead as secondary and tertiary predators, thriving within supporting ecological roles that demanded flexibility rather than supremacy. Their bodies continued changing through countless generations, yet they seldom expanded into the full dimensions or ecological influence displayed by the giants above them. That enduring restraint proved to be an extraordinary advantage. Each extinction removed dominant competitors, but sharks repeatedly escaped complete destruction. They survived the late Devonian extinction. They endured the catastrophe at the end of the Permian period. They passed through upheavals, marking the close of the Triassic and later Jurassic intervals. Finally, they persisted beyond the impact event that ended the Cretaceous period. Every reset erased familiar rulers, yet sharks continued swimming through altered oceans, carrying with them hundreds of millions of years of accumulated evolutionary experience. When the Mosasaurus disappeared, alongside the remaining great marine reptiles, the ecological landscape changed once again. Apex positions that had been occupied for millions of years suddenly became available. There was no lengthy pause before life responded. Within only a few million years after the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, shark diversity increased across the world's oceans. New forms appeared, established groups expanded into fresh environments, and body sizes began growing beyond what had previously been common. The transformation reflected the same recurring pattern that had unfolded after every earlier collapse. Evolution did not hesitate once opportunity emerged. Among the lineages responding to those newly opened conditions was the ancient branch known as Otodus. It did not appear from nothing, nor did it represent an entirely novel invention. Instead, it emerged from ancestry that had persisted through earlier ages, carrying inherited adaptations that suddenly became more valuable in oceans no longer ruled by giant reptiles. Generation after generation, members of this lineage increased in size, refining jaws, strengthening teeth, and expanding their ecological reach. Long before the appearance of the celebrated giant that would eventually define this family, the evolutionary pathway had already begun climbing toward greater scale. Seen across the immense breadth of geological history, sharks resemble a living reserve maintained through repeated planetary upheaval. They were never absent, even when overshadowed by more spectacular hunters. They continued reproducing, diversifying, and exploring new variations while other lineages occupied the dominant roles. Their persistence ensured that when another vacancy appeared, suitable candidates already existed. Evolution required no complete reinvention. It simply continued shaping organisms that had patiently endured across countless changing worlds. This pattern reveals another enduring characteristic of the evolutionary process guiding marine history. It does not merely create remarkable predators when conditions permit. It also preserves adaptable lineages capable of wading through immense stretches of time without disappearing. Survival itself becomes a powerful resource, allowing ancient groups to inherit opportunities that sudden catastrophe unexpectedly provides. Across hundreds of millions of years, sharks became the enduring thread connecting one oceanic age to the next. Kingdoms of armored fish, colossal reptiles, and countless forgotten hunters rose and vanished around them. Through every transformation, they remained, carried forward by resilience, until the changing seas finally offered the opening they had been prepared to occupy for ages, beyond ordinary imagination. Another transformation began without fanfare, unfolding alongside the continuing expansion of sharks rather than replacing it. Around 50 million years ago, an entirely different branch of life approached the shoreline. This time, the travelers were not reptiles returning to familiar waters, but mammals whose ancestors had long mastered the landscapes of rivers, forests, and open ground. The evolutionary process had discovered another source of possibility, and once again, the boundary between land and sea became a place of remarkable change. The earliest known ancestors of whales were the pachycetids, four-legged mammals about the size of wolves that lived near shallow waterways across regions now belonging to Pakistan and India. They still walked upon sturdy limbs, breathed air beneath open skies, and spent much of their lives on land. Yet their bones already hinted at subtle adaptations for hearing beneath the surface, suggesting that rivers and coastal waters were becoming increasingly important parts of their world. The transition had begun not with giant bodies or powerful tails, but with small shifts repeated through countless generations. As descendants spread into aquatic environments, each generation carried slight differences that altered how they moved, hunted, and survived. Legs that had once supported running gradually became less useful beneath the surface. Hind limbs diminished as stronger tails assumed the task of propulsion. The backbone lengthened and flexed with increasing efficiency. The nostrils slowly migrated higher across the skull, making each breath easier while the body remained almost completely submerged. Broad tail flukes eventually appeared, transforming muscular motion into graceful thrust. Within roughly 15 million years, creatures descended from ordinary terrestrial mammals had become capable of traveling through the open ocean with astonishing confidence. Among those early giants was Basilosaurus, a whale relative that lived around 40 million years ago and grew to approximately 18 meters, that is nearly 59 feet, in length. Its body stretched into an elongated, serpentine form unlike the shapes displayed by modern whales, revealing that the pathway toward marine mastery still explored many possibilities before arriving at later designs. It hunted through ancient seas as one of the dominant predators of its age, demonstrating how rapidly mammals had expanded into ecological roles once occupied by entirely different groups. When Basilosaurus was first described by scientists, its immense skeleton produced understandable confusion. The prevailing understanding of natural history offered little preparation for an animal like this. Because its elongated body resembled that of great marine reptiles, known from the fossil record, it was initially classified as one of them. The name chosen for it means king lizard, preserving that early misunderstanding even after further discoveries revealed its true identity. Careful examination eventually uncovered unmistakable mammalian characteristics, showing that this enormous hunter belonged to an entirely different lineage. Perhaps the most remarkable evidence remained attached to its own body. Along each flank rested small, vestigial hind limbs, no longer capable of supporting movement across land, yet still present as unmistakable reminders of terrestrial ancestry. They served little practical purpose in swimming, but they preserved the memory of an earlier existence. Evolution had not erased every trace of the journey. Instead, it carried fragments of the past forward while constructing an animal suited for an entirely new world. The deeper pattern became impossible to overlook. Hundreds of millions of years earlier, reptiles had entered the oceans and gradually acquired streamlined bodies, powerful tails, and efficient swimming forms under the persistent influence of marine life. Now, mammals, beginning from completely different ancestors, were arriving at many of those same solutions. This is convergent evolution, the process through which unrelated organisms independently develop similar physical traits because they experience the same environmental pressures. The ocean demanded efficient movement, sustained pursuit, and mastery of buoyancy, and those demands shaped vastly different lineages towards strikingly similar outcomes. The evolutionary process had not repeated itself by copying an earlier design. It had simply applied the same enduring pressures to entirely different raw material, revealing once again that the sea continually guides unrelated travelers toward familiar destinations through paths that begin on very different shores. Long after marine reptiles had vanished and whales had claimed the open sea as their own, another remarkable hunter emerged from within the mammalian lineage. Around 9 to 10 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, the oceans supported a predator whose capabilities placed it among the most formidable active hunters in this entire history. It did not rely upon armor, extraordinary body size alone, or hidden ambush from ancient shorelines. It pursued immense prey directly through open water, equipped with weapons unlike those of any other known marine mammal. This animal is known as Livyatan melvilli, an extinct relative of the modern sperm whale. Part of its scientific name honors Herman Melville, whose novel about a great whale had already become woven into human culture long before this fossil was recognized. Estimated to measure between 13 and 17 meters, that is, nearly 43 to 56 feet, in length, Livyatan possessed a broad skull, immense jaw muscles, and a body built for sustained pursuit across vast stretches of ocean. It represented another direction taken by whale evolution, one centered not upon deep diving for soft-bodied prey, but upon overpowering some of the largest animals alive. Its most extraordinary feature rested within its jaws. Individual teeth reached lengths of approximately 36 centimeters, that is nearly 14 inches. These remain the largest known predatory teeth in the entire fossil record, exceeding those of any other animal known from Earth's history. They were not reduced structures, decorative tusks, or specialized filtering apparatus. Every tooth functioned as an active hunting weapon, capable of gripping struggling prey, while powerful jaw muscles delivered crushing force. Unlike modern sperm whales, whose upper teeth play only a limited role during feeding, Livyatan carried large functional teeth in both the upper and lower jaws, creating an impressive arsenal designed for seizing enormous victims. The prey pursued by this whale reveals even more about its place within the ancient seas. Rather than concentrating upon fish or squid, evidence suggests that Livyatan hunted other whales. Many of those victims were themselves substantial marine mammals, requiring strength, endurance, and coordination to overcome. Predator and prey belonged to the same broad mammalian lineage, yet occupied very different ecological roles. The evolutionary process had once again produced an apex hunter capable of challenging some of the largest warm-blooded animals inhabiting the oceans. At nearly the same time, another celebrated predator patrolled those same waters. Members of the Otatus lineage had continued increasing in size until producing the giant commonly known as Megalodon. Both Livyatan and Megalodon depended upon large marine mammals as primary food sources. They occupied overlapping ecosystems, pursued similar prey, and almost certainly encountered one another wherever productive seas gathered abundant whale populations. The ancient oceans therefore supported not a single supreme hunter, but two immense predators developing along entirely separate evolutionary pathways while competing for remarkably similar resources. The pattern echoes earlier chapters of marine history, although the participants had completely changed. During the Jurassic period, different reptilian lineages had expanded into distinct predatory strategies while sharing the same seas. Now, millions of years later, the evolutionary process repeated that broader arrangement using unrelated organisms. One experiment arose from sharks, whose ancestry reached back toward the earliest chapters of vertebrate history. The other emerged from terrestrial mammals that had entered the ocean comparatively recently. Their shared environment encouraged different bodies toward comparable ecological destinations, revealing once more how enduring environmental pressures shape independent lineages. Livyatan therefore represents more than an exceptionally powerful whale. It demonstrates that the evolutionary process rarely settles upon a single solution when abundant energy and opportunity exist. Instead, it explores multiple possibilities at once, allowing separate branches of life to test different approaches against the same demanding world. The Miocene Ocean became another grand arena where parallel experiments unfolded together, each refining its own methods while responding to identical challenges presented by an ocean that continually rewards successful hunters, regardless of the ancestry from which they began. By the time the Miocene seas reached their greatest abundance, one predator had expanded across nearly every warm ocean on Earth with remarkable consistency. It did not belong to a single coastline or isolated basin. Its range stretched across tropical and temperate waters, following the great migrations of marine mammals through an interconnected world. Otodus Megalodon remained the dominant apex predator for more than 13 million years, from roughly 15.9 million until 3.6 million years ago. Holding that position longer than any other hunter encountered throughout this story, entire generations of whales lived and disappeared beneath its shadow, while continents continued their slow drift across the planet. Its immense proportions reflected an ocean capable of sustaining extraordinary energy demands. Most scientific estimates place its length between 15 and 20 meters, which is about 49 to 66 feet. Every movement of such an animal required enormous quantities of food, yet the flourishing populations of marine mammals provided exactly the resource needed to support a predator of unprecedented scale. The relationship between hunter and prey had once again reached a balance that favored continued escalation, each generation responding to the pressures imposed by the other. Power concentrated most dramatically within its jaws. Estimates of its bite force exceed 40,000 pounds per square inch, representing the greatest force calculated for any known animal, whether living or extinct. Thick muscles anchored to an enormous skull allowed those jaws to close with crushing efficiency, while broad, serrated teeth sliced through bone and dense tissue alike. Individual teeth sometimes exceeded 18 centimeters, which is about 7 inches in length. Unlike delicate fossil bones that survive only under exceptional conditions, these durable teeth endured across immense spans of time, becoming scattered through ancient sediments beneath every major ocean and eventually appearing on every continent through geological change and human discovery. Because those teeth can be held within a human hand, they have become powerful symbols of the ancient sea. A single fossil immediately communicates size in a way that fragmented skeletons often cannot. Their shape is unmistakable, their edges still sharp after millions of years, and their proportions invite the imagination to reconstruct the animal from which they came. Much of the enduring fascination surrounding Megalodon grows from this direct physical connection. Long before complete scientific reconstructions became possible, One tooth alone suggested the presence of a hunter unlike anything swimming today. Yet the animal itself is not the central destination of this journey. It is neither the largest marine organism ever to exist, nor the final apex predator produced by evolutionary history, nor the most anatomically specialized body ever assembled beneath the waves. Its fame reflects visibility rather than uniqueness. Many earlier hunters introduced innovations that later lineages refined, replaced, or abandoned as changing oceans reshaped the balance between opportunity and competition. Megalodon stands as the most recognizable chapter because its remains are widespread, durable, and immediately understandable, not because the broader process reached its ultimate expression within this single species. Seen across the immense sweep of geological time, the same pattern continues to emerge with remarkable consistency. Buoyancy removed many physical limits imposed by life upon land. Rich marine ecosystems supplied the energy required for increasing body size. Competition among predators rewarded continual refinement of hunting ability. Repeated extinction events cleared ecological space that surviving lineages rapidly occupied. These four forces worked together again and again, regardless of whether the starting material consisted of armored fishes, marine reptiles, sharks, or mammals. Megalodon therefore becomes another expression of an enduring process rather than an isolated marvel. The same conditions that elevated Anomalocaris through Cambrian waters, strengthened Dunkleosteus within Devonian seas, shaped Mosasaurus after earlier reptilian lineages vanished, and transformed the descendants of walking mammals into Basilosaurus, also guided the rise of this immense shark. Across hundreds of millions of years, the participants changed, their bodies changed, and the oceans themselves changed. Yet the deeper pattern remained astonishingly consistent, refining new apex predators whenever the living world presented the opportunity. Nothing announced the ending with a single, overwhelming moment. There was no blazing impact from the sky, no continent split apart by immense eruptions, and no abrupt collapse that erased an empire in a single day. Instead, the transformation unfolded with extraordinary patience, measured across countless generations. Around 3.6 million years ago, Otodus Megalodon disappeared from the oceans. The predator that had ruled warm seas for more than 13 million years gradually slipped from the living world, not because of sudden disaster, but because the conditions that had once favored its existence slowly drifted away. The greatest change unfolded close to shore, where young Megalodon spent the earliest stage of life. Shallow coastal waters warmed easily beneath ancient climates, creating sheltered nursery habitats rich with food and comparatively protected from larger predators. These environments allowed growing sharks to reach a size at which few animals could threaten them. As global climates cooled over millions of years, those warm coastal regions steadily contracted. Shorelines changed, sea temperatures shifted, and suitable nursery grounds became fewer with each passing age. Juvenile sharks entering the world encountered a landscape less capable of supporting their survival, and each generation contributed fewer mature adults than the one before. No single season revealed this decline. Instead, the population gradually lost its ability to replace itself. Mature hunters could still roam enormous distances, pursuing marine mammals through open water with tremendous efficiency, yet every successful generation depended upon the survival of the smallest individuals. The immense adults represented only the visible summit of a much larger cycle. Once that foundation weakened, the towering structure above it became increasingly difficult to sustain. While those environmental changes unfolded, the surrounding community continued adapting. Other predators expanded into opportunities that had once belonged almost entirely to Megalodon. Early great white sharks possessed smaller bodies but greater agility, allowing them to exploit prey with remarkable flexibility. At the same time, the ancestors of modern killer whales developed increasingly coordinated hunting behavior. Working together, these mammals could challenge prey through endurance, communication, and cooperation rather than overwhelming size alone. They entered many of the same feeding grounds, drawing from the same populations of whales and seals that had long sustained the giant shark. Competition therefore shifted in subtle but powerful ways. The largest body no longer guaranteed the greatest advantage. Speed, maneuverability, social coordination, and the ability to exploit changing ecosystems became increasingly valuable as climates continued evolving. Across thousands upon thousands of generations, these pressures accumulated until the balance that had once favored a gigantic solitary hunter no longer remained. Evolution had not abandoned its earlier design. It had simply begun rewarding different solutions to the same enduring challenge. Seen across the broader history of life, this disappearance does not represent failure. The underlying process remained as active as ever, continuously responding to altered conditions with remarkable consistency. The oceans had once supported a predator reaching nearly 20 meters, which is about 66 feet, in length, because energy, habitat, prey, and climate all aligned to sustain such a form. As those variables changed, natural selection redirected its influence toward organisms better suited to the new world that was emerging. Almost within the same span of geological time, another transformation accelerated. Baleen whales, particularly the lineage leading to the modern blue whale, expanded toward dimensions never before achieved by any known animal. Freed from the need to hunt large prey directly, these giants prospered by filtering immense quantities of small organisms from increasingly productive oceans shaped by cooler climates and strengthened ocean circulation. The ecological space, altered by the disappearance of Megalodon, did not remain empty. It acquired a different expression, one built upon abundance rather than pursuit, upon enormous scale, sustained by countless tiny lives drifting together through the sea. The ancient pattern endured, not by preserving every giant it created, but by continually reshaping greatness to match the changing world. The evidence no longer rests within any single skeleton, tooth, jaw, or fossil bed. It emerges only after the immense span of time is allowed to unfold as one continuous landscape. Across hundreds of millions of years, separate stories that once appeared isolated gradually settle into alignment, revealing a pattern far larger than any individual creature could ever represent. Each chapter has carried its own distinctive cast, yet together they describe the same recurring process with remarkable consistency. The first great rulers were arthropods, flourishing when complex animal life itself was still new. Long after their dominance faded, armored fishes expanded into the vacant role, carrying entirely different anatomy built upon an entirely different evolutionary foundation. Marine reptiles followed after another profound reset, arriving not from ancient ocean ancestors but from animals that had already mastered life upon land before returning to the sea. When their reign eventually ended, cartilaginous fishes rose into the opening, refining a lineage that had persisted through every upheaval without previously claiming complete dominance. Mammals entered later still, reshaped from terrestrial ancestors into fully marine giants whose bodies echoed solutions discovered long before by unrelated reptiles. 5 independent lineages, separated by immense evolutionary distance, each arrived at the same destination during different ages of Earth. No branch inherited the role directly from the one before it. Each began with different skeletal structures, different methods of reproduction, different ancestors, and different histories. Yet every lineage encountered the same environmental pressures after ecological space became available. Buoyancy reduced the burden of enormous size. Abundant marine productivity supplied extraordinary energy. Competition rewarded greater speed, greater strength, greater efficiency, or greater intelligence. Extinction repeatedly cleared the highest ecological position, leaving opportunity where dominance had once existed. The result was never an identical creature, but it was consistently another apex predator shaped by the same underlying forces. Every example throughout this journey shared another striking characteristic. Each was built within the ocean. The sea repeatedly transformed unrelated organisms into giants capable of ruling vast ecosystems, while continents followed different evolutionary paths shaped by gravity, fragmented habitats, and more limited biological productivity. Land certainly produced formidable hunters, yet none emerged through the same repeated sequence of complete ecological collapse, followed by reconstruction into progressively new apex forms, spanning such immense intervals of time. The oceans accomplished that transformation again and again without interruption across 500 million years of planetary history. The intervals between those reconstructions also reveal their own gradual rhythm. Early transitions unfolded across comparatively longer stretches of geological time. Later recoveries accelerated as surviving lineages became increasingly diverse and adaptable, providing evolution with richer material from which natural selection could build. Each reset, therefore, began from a stronger foundation than the one before. The disappearance of one dominant hunter was followed not by prolonged emptiness, but by increasingly rapid experimentation, refinement, and replacement, as life responded to changing conditions with extraordinary persistence. Viewed from this wider perspective, the celebrated animals themselves become signposts rather than destinations. Anomalocaris, Dunkleosteus, the great marine reptiles, Megalodon, and the immense whales each occupy a distinct chapter, yet none stands alone. Their true significance lies in what they collectively reveal. They are recurring expressions of a deeper process that remained active while continents drifted, climates transformed, and entire biological worlds appeared and vanished. The story, therefore, has never truly belonged to any single predator. The creatures are the evidence left behind by an enduring engine of adaptation that continued operating through every extinction, every recovery, every changing ocean, and every passing age. Generation after generation, lineage after lineage, the same vast process accepted whatever living material remained, reshaped it according to the conditions of its time, and produced another ruler of the sea. Across 500 million years, the builders changed, the bodies changed, and the oceans changed, but the pattern endured with astonishing fidelity, revealing not isolated marvels, but one continuous history of relentless creation. Only now does the larger design come fully into view. Every ancient shoreline, every vanished predator, every recovery after catastrophe has been pointing toward the same underlying framework. What appeared at first to be a sequence of extraordinary creatures gradually resolves into a single process, expressed again and again through different forms. The creatures changed, the continents changed, and the oceans themselves changed, yet the engine driving those transformations remained remarkably consistent. Its operation rests upon 4 interlocking mechanisms, each depending upon the others, each incomplete when standing alone. The first is buoyancy. Water supports weight in a way that land never can, lifting bodies that would collapse beneath their own mass if they attempted the same proportions upon solid ground. As organisms become larger, buoyancy increasingly removes the burden imposed by gravity, allowing evolution to explore dimensions unavailable in terrestrial environments. That same medium also creates a fully three-dimensional hunting world. Prey cannot rely only upon what lies ahead or behind. Danger may arrive from above, below, or any direction between, encouraging continual refinement of movement, perception, and predatory design as generations pass. The second mechanism is energy abundance. The oceans circulate nutrients across immense distances, sustaining food webs that remain productive over vast regions and through changing seasons. Tiny drifting organisms nourish larger animals, which in turn sustain still larger hunters through long chains of biological exchange. This steady movement of energy provides the caloric foundation required for bodies of extraordinary size. Without an environment capable of supplying such immense and dependable resources, even the most successful giant could not persist across evolutionary time. Size is not merely permitted by buoyancy, it is sustained by abundance. The third mechanism is the evolutionary arms race. Every improvement acquired by a predator alters the pressures experienced by its prey. Faster pursuit encourages quicker escape. Stronger jaws favor thicker defenses or sharper awareness. Greater intelligence rewards more sophisticated responses. Those changes then reshape the selective pressures acting upon predators once again. Neither side reaches lasting equilibrium because every successful adaptation creates fresh opportunities for another. Across millions of years, this continuous exchange steadily favors greater capability, producing hunters whose anatomy reflects countless generations of accumulated refinement rather than sudden invention. The fourth mechanism emerges whenever the living world experiences profound loss. Mass extinctions erase dominant lineages that once appeared permanent, leaving ecological roles unexpectedly vacant. Yet those empty positions never remain open indefinitely. Whatever lineage survives with suitable characteristics begins expanding into the available opportunity, carrying the accumulated inheritance of earlier evolutionary history into an entirely new chapter. The arms race resumes from a different starting point, building upon foundations laid by previous worlds while producing forms that are unmistakably new. Every reset, therefore, becomes both an ending and a beginning, preserving the process even while replacing its participants. No single mechanism can explain the full history. Buoyancy without abundant energy cannot sustain giants. Rich food supplies without continual competition do not favor relentless refinement. Competition without periodic ecological clearing eventually settles into established relationships rather than repeated reconstruction. Extinction alone creates opportunity, but without suitable environments and evolutionary pressure, that opportunity remains unrealized. Each mechanism depends upon the others, forming a connected system whose strength arises from their interaction rather than their independence. Seen together across 500 million years, these four forces transform isolated events into one continuous narrative. Remove any one of them, and the pattern dissolves before reaching its greatest expressions. Leave them operating together across 500 million years, and the repeated emergence of enormous, highly specialized marine apex predators no longer appears as an extraordinary coincidence. It becomes the expected outcome of a world whose physical laws, ecological structure, Evolutionary competition and recurring resets have been working together without interruption, patiently shaping one generation after another, until the same remarkable pattern emerged again and again from entirely different beginnings. Nothing about the process has ended. The ages have changed, continents have drifted across the globe, and countless lineages have appeared before fading into memory. Yet the same underlying forces continue their work beneath modern waves. The pattern traced across deep time has not become a relic preserved only in stone. It remains active in the present, operating through the same four mechanisms that have shaped every chapter before this one. The machine has never been switched off. It continues without pause. Its most dramatic living expression is not hidden within ancient rock, but moving through the oceans at this very moment. The blue whale has surpassed every known giant that came before it, becoming the largest animal in the entire fossil record, spanning roughly 500 million years. This astonishing scale emerged under the same principles already revealed. Buoyancy supports a body that could never function upon land. Vast stores of oceanic productivity provide the enormous energy required to sustain such a life. The living world did not stop producing extremes after the disappearance of prehistoric giants. It continued refining them into new forms. Another reminder drifts through the deepest waters, almost beyond ordinary experience. The colossal squid reaches an estimated length of between 12 kilometers, which is about 7.5 miles, and 14 kilometers, that is nearly 8.7 miles, including its tentacles. Its existence was not confirmed by science until 1925, despite possessing eyes that measure about 30 centimeters, that is nearly 100 feet across, the largest known among living animals. For countless generations, it remained known only through scattered remains recovered from the stomachs of whales or tangled within fishing equipment, leaving much of its life concealed beneath extraordinary depths. That concealment reflects a larger reality. Human knowledge of the ocean remains remarkably incomplete. Less than 26% of the ocean floor has been mapped in meaningful detail, and direct observation covers only a small portion of even that limited area. Beneath approximately 200 meters, which is about 656 feet, sunlight fades away, pressure rises relentlessly, temperatures remain low, and exploration becomes increasingly difficult. Those conditions have repeatedly served as the setting in which evolution explored some of its most unusual anatomical possibilities. Vast regions, therefore, remain known more through inference than direct observation. Across those unseen expanses, buoyancy still removes the limitations imposed by gravity. Ocean currents continue distributing nutrients through immense food webs. Predators and prey remain locked within the same endless evolutionary contest that has unfolded since the earliest chapters of marine history. Extinction has not vanished either. Species continue appearing and disappearing, ecological roles continue shifting, and every alteration reshapes opportunities for whatever lineages endure. None of the four mechanisms belongs exclusively to vanished worlds. Each continues operating within modern seas exactly as before. That continuity gives the long history a remarkable coherence. The armored hunters of distant ages, the swift marine reptiles, the colossal sharks, and the giant whales no longer appear as isolated marvels separated by impossible spans of time. Instead, they become successive expressions of one persistent process responding to changing conditions while preserving its fundamental logic. Different bodies carried the role, but the forces shaping those bodies remained strikingly consistent. The conclusion therefore emerges naturally from everything that has come before. The machine is not a forgotten feature of Earth's distant past. Its greatest confirmed achievement is alive today, and the environment that repeatedly generated extraordinary predators across 500 million years still exists beneath modern oceans. Immense reaches of that realm have scarcely been examined, leaving the full range of its living possibilities incomplete within human understanding. The story has never belonged solely to fossils. It has always belonged to an ocean whose deepest evolutionary work continues beyond the limits of our present observation. The journey returns to the place where it began, though the view has changed completely. The ocean is no longer merely a setting filled with remarkable creatures from vanished ages. It has revealed itself as something far more enduring, a system governed by physical law, chemical possibility, and immense stretches of time. The giants that crossed its waters were never isolated miracles. They were recurring outcomes of conditions that persisted long before any observer arrived to witness them. Across 500 million years, the forms changed, the lineages shifted, and entire worlds disappeared, yet the underlying process remained remarkably constant. That process has never depended upon awareness. It unfolded through approximately 490 million years before the first human being ever drew a breath. Continents gathered and separated, climates drifted between warmth and cold, and oceans repeatedly reshaped the living world without ceremony or recognition. Every generation of apex hunter emerged because the same forces continued operating without interruption. Nothing in that history suggests the process required an audience. Nothing indicates it paused until someone learned to describe it. Even today, the environment that sustained those ancient transformations still surrounds the greater part of our planet. Far below familiar coastlines, pressure rises beyond 1,000 atmospheres, while sunlight disappears completely. Temperatures hover close to freezing, preserving conditions unlike those experienced anywhere upon land. Those depths resemble the same physical setting that repeatedly fostered extraordinary evolutionary experiments throughout this story. Gravity remains softened by buoyancy. Food webs continue stretching through immense volumes of water. Predators and prey continue shaping one another across generations. And ecological change continues, opening opportunities for new adaptations. Human exploration has only begun touching that immense realm. The deepest descents ever achieved reached isolated locations for brief moments before returning once more toward the surface. Beneath those encounters extends an enormous volume of water descending for many kilometers, which is about many miles, through landscapes that remain only partially described. Countless habitats have never been visited directly. Countless species have never been observed alive. Entire relationships between hunter and hunted continue unfolding beyond ordinary reach, guided by pressures that instruments have sampled only in scattered places across an ocean too vast for complete examination. This does not require imagining impossible creatures concealed beyond every ridge or trench. The history preserved within stone has already demonstrated what sustained evolutionary forces are capable of producing when given sufficient opportunity. Again and again, unrelated lineages answered the same ecological demands with astonishing precision. Armor gave way to bone, bone gave way to reptiles, reptiles yielded to sharks, mammals entered the sea, and each inherited the same relentless contest. The identities changed, yet the process remained recognizable, like a melody carried through different instruments across immeasurable spans of time. Seen from that perspective, the fossil record becomes less a museum of vanished marvels than a long sequence of completed experiments. Each extinction erased one result while preserving the conditions that would shape the next. Each new beginning carried echoes of everything that had come before, building upon ancient foundations without ever repeating them exactly. The machine never sought perfection. It simply continued, responding to the opportunities presented by an ever-changing world. Somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary light, beneath crushing pressure and water older than human memory, those same four forces continue their patient work at this very moment. They ask for nothing, announce nothing, and wait for no witness. They have always required only the ocean, the laws of nature, and time enough for possibility to become reality. The machine has never noticed that we are listening, and it has never needed to.